We've heard quite a few things about academic, legal, economic, maybe social situations. Let me talk to you about the theological and practical aspects of the problem. But I'd like to tell you a story. It's about an elderly woman who went to confession. And she sat with the priest. In the Orthodox tradition, it's face to face, not behind a screen. And she said, "Father, as I come to the final years and chapter of my life, I want to know what will happen. I've done my best in life. I never killed anyone. I never cheated on my husband. I didn't want something that wasn't mine." And she went on down the line to tell the priest about the things she hadn't done. And after a few moments, the priest looked at her and he said, "I'm very sorry to tell you this. You'll probably go straight to hell." And of course, she was horrified. And he said, life is not about what you don't do or you haven't done. Life is about what you do. That's why the greatest sin might be that of indifference. And God gives us the opportunity in life and presents us these gifts so we might respond and we might act. Our world has become a world of indifference. Indifference to the real problems of society and individuals. We are a world that doesn't seem to care anymore because we are too caught up in our own identities and our individualism. Families and societies almost no longer exist. It's all about me. And we have to change things and the way we see things and how we think so we might correct some of the problems. So what do clergy do? We address audiences. And there are, for me, three types of audiences. One which we address, and that is the church, the synagogue, perhaps the mosque, on down the line. There are those who go to music festivals and listen to concerts. And then there is the great audience called the sports audience. And we need to use these means and address these audiences to bring them to a greater understanding of what must be done. For faith leaders and faith institutions must take the initiative. We are dealing with a world of ignorance, and I can prove it to you. Those of you who have children, ask them to construct an entire paragraph without any mistakes in grammar or spelling. That is, of course, not using a computer. And ask them to do so in cursive writing and not printing or typing. But our ignorance goes beyond those simple things to our ignorance about the other and the problems of the other. We seem to only look at the mirror and see ourselves and our own problems. And we need to develop a process of education and teaching people about modern slavery, human trafficking, and a suffering world. The Kluwer Institute, especially through the initiatives of Bishop Alistair and the Anglican Church, produce all sorts of materials. And in confession, the Orthodox are building on the idea and building a system of educational materials to teach through Sunday school and adult religious education about the problems of trafficking. Dr. Brazo is working with me on that. To speak of the slavery first to sin and the fall. To understand about the slavery of bondage and labor using Joseph, the problems of employment, engendered slavery, talking about the nation of Israel in Egypt, domestic labor, and then, of course, Christ as the liberator and the one who frees. Because we have to worry about freeing the entire person, not just the person who suffers physically, but also the person who suffers emotionally, psychologically, mentally. That's why we also want to institute programs to look at the survivor, not at the victim. To help the survivor remember that there is always faith, there is always hope, and there's always love. That's at the core of Christian teaching. And I can speak only as a Christian, because I am a Christian myself. And we use these things, and hopefully through the arts, to teach and help survivors express themselves through painting, through dance, through poetry, as we heard earlier, through song and other means, because the pain is deep, and we're supposed to be part of the healing process. We need to see the human being as the icon of God. Remember, I'm speaking theologically. And if we look at the human being in that way and in that manner, how could we oppress anyone? But we don't understand the systems of oppression and slavery. We just walk down the street and see the people working on the scaffolding, or see the nanny taking the children by the hand, and don't understand that those people are victims and they are being manipulated. If we were to give paper and pencil to most of our congregations and ask them, what do we mean by human slavery and trafficking? They'll tell us the sex trade, the women who work in the nail parlors, and maybe a couple other things, Thai massage. But what about the others who are trapped behind those closed doors? What about those on the scaffolding? What about those people who have no voice? Do you know in some parts of the world, you can still buy a slave today? Have we not gone beyond that in our world? Or we continue to progress backward and regress in a real way? Our world is in a very sad situation. And the only way to change the world is to really educate people and move them forward. I know we're pressed for time, so I'm going to close in just a moment. We decided to do something like this, protecting the vulnerable. And there are articles, one is by Dr. Brazu, one by myself, one by a psychologist, one by an attorney, the other by an educator, so they could be used in the schools. So as we go through the different levels of life, we might also move in the different levels of education. And for us as clergy, as Orthodox, we see on the cover Christ on the top who's liberating humanity from sin. And then Moses leading the people out of Israel, out of bondage and slavery to freedom. But freedom is just not to walk across the street. Freedom is really to be able to determine my own path, my way of life, how I see it, and how I choose to live. In life, we should give others what we want for ourselves. I want to be free. I want to make my choices. Don't other people want those same values and ideals? And we need to institute in our young people those values and ideals, and not those, excuse me for saying it, of the corporate world. Profit, gain, manipulation, and the barrier so that the other stays out. We need to be the human family that supports the other. I pray God will continue to bless the endeavors and the work of this organization. And if we can, let's do what we should do. Before we leave this world, let's make sure it's a little bit better than we found it when we came into it, so that when we exit, we will hear those words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Thank you.